Welcome everybody to today's webinar program. My name is Alec Cooley. I'm Senior Advisor with Busch Systems. And today's program is a joint production of both Busch Systems and the Zero Waste Campus Council. For those of you not familiar with the Zero Waste Campus Council, they are a nonprofit organization that works with recycling managers and zero waste managers such as yourself at different large institutional settings, including universities, corporate campuses, and others. We'll be hearing a little bit more from Zero Waste Campus Council after toward the end of the program, but I welcome. We're excited to be participating with them again today. So let me just quickly sort of set up today's program and our format. Obviously, organics, food waste collection has become a very hot topic across the board, across across the U.S. and Canada. A lot of that's being driven by state or province level policy requiring programs to be put in place, but also we know that it's an excellent opportunity to be pulling more greenhouse gas emissions out of the waste stream by diverting these materials from the landfill. For many years, a lot of programs have had food waste collection from dining facilities, but this is still a relatively new frontier for a lot of institutions on how do you capture food scraps from indoor bin settings, public spaces, academic buildings, offices, other locations that are not traditionally what we think of as being places of food generation, but where nonetheless, when you do waste audits, you find there's a huge percentage of the waste stream that is in fact organic and can be recovered. So that's going to be the focus of our program today. We're going to be doing a hybrid format as we have with most recent programs, following a model that the Zero Waste Campus Council does with their monthly meetup waste down programs. We're going to have a speaker in a moment who's going to just set the tone, help us to all sort of frame our thinking around some of the main issues related to this. But we're going to do that brief presentation, and then as you can see, we're going to break up into separate group discussions. There have been quite a few webinars, conferences. There are a lot of good best practice resources out there about how you set up these programs. We want to take our time and really focus on how do we go beyond just the talking and presentations and actually share some of our experiences, lessons learned, and have a more informal format, knowing that that's a good way that we can learn. So. We will be, after the presentation, we'll describe a little bit more how we're going to organize the group discussions, but just want to show you here the overall agenda as it stands today. So first, though, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to introduce, before I introduce Amy, one second, just want to encourage folks to participate. This is intended to be interactive, both using the chat. We encourage you to share examples or other things that you're doing in the chat at any point during the program. Obviously, please keep yourself muted. Unlike the traditional presentation Zooms, this is one where everybody has the ability to turn the cameras on and off. So just encourage you to keep yourself muted. Once we do go into the group discussions, though, it is helpful if you can have your cameras on, just so it feels a little more connected to others in the discussion. We will be capturing notes from today's program on this Google Deck, and this is actually a good opportunity. Look into the chat. My colleague is going to drop in a link. These slides that I'm running through right now and that we're going to see from Amy in a moment are all located on a Google Drive that anyone can access during the program or afterward, including where we will be capturing notes. So look into that chat, and you all go ahead and keep this up on my screen so we can follow this. But once we go into the group discussions, I encourage you to pull up this Google Deck on your own computer to follow along with notes and all. So with that, now let me introduce Amy Martman, who is a Director of Sustainability with SBM, which is a custodial management and service provider. And I'll let Amy introduce the company a little bit more, but Amy's going to talk through just a case study example of a client that they've worked with and how they've set up the organics collection program, covering, again, some of the major components of what it takes to implement one of these programs. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Amy.
Hello, thanks, Alec. And yeah, so do you want to advance the slides, and you can just pop to the next one. So welcome everybody. As Alex said, I'll be getting into specific case study, but also some examples of some things to consider when expanding your compost program beyond the cafe areas. First of all, just SBM quickly is a janitorial service provider. We service a wide variety of industry sectors across the US and other countries throughout the world with green cleaning as a standard practice. I sit on our corporate sustainability team where we provide support and consulting to our clients and also offer some consulting for other businesses as well. We do a lot with zero waste, including implementation and expansion of recycling and organics programs, as we'll discuss today. Next slide, please. So in this case study that I'll cover today, it's set in the Midwest in the United States, but we have worked with many different customers from West Coast to East Coast and many places in between. Our focus today is on expanding organics collection to office and break room areas outside of the cafeteria and administrative settings. I know a lot of folks on here have had a lot of experience, so I'm looking forward to hearing some of your best practices and even some of the challenges that you've faced in the discussion later. So this particular example is for a consumer brands business. They have 8 sites spread across one metropolitan area. When we first discussed composting with them in 2020, they piloted the program at a single location in just the cafeteria, front and back of house, plus the restrooms to capture that paper towel waste. In 2021, they expanded that to office and break areas. After a waste audit found that 51% of office and break room trash could in fact be composted in their program. In 2022, after conducting a waste audit of all 8 of their locations, they further expanded the program to all of the sites later that year. On the next couple slides, I'll get into some specifics for considerations and challenges that we went through for this program. Next slide, please. So when we were looking to expand the compost program from the cafeteria and restrooms to the office and break areas for this site, we already knew that in addition to food waste and in addition to the food waste, the local organics waste vendor accepts paper towels and fiber-based food serviceware. So we worked with a food services vendor to make purchasing changes so that all to-go food containers provided by the cafeteria are fiber-based. We also had conversations with the vendor about if they were able to accept other types of BPI certified compostable serviceware, including cold cups and utensils. But due to their specific processing system, those items didn't break down well. And so they told us not to put them in with the organic waste. And they have since allowed compostable utensils as they've been able to kind of test those and see how they work within their specific program. So focusing in on what is and was not accepted and is important to any compost program expansion. I know this sounds very basic and rudimentary, but it's super, super important, especially since we're seeing a shift in many West Coast area facilities no longer accepting PLA or bioplastics, which is causing confusion in messaging to employees. What used to be composted is no longer accepted. There's also many places on the East Coast that rely on anaerobic digestion facilities, in which case only food waste is accepted, or if they say they're accepting the other compostable serviceware, sometimes that's taken out in the pre-screening process so they can get what they want. Next slide, please. So bins. There's so many great bin options out there when you're looking to expand the compost program. And I know Busch Systems has several customizable options. In my example that we have today, instead of buying new multi-stream consoles, this customer just wanted to buy standalone bins designated for compost that were similar in size and look to their existing bins. We did recommend to them that the bin be a different color to make it visually stand out. They selected yellow, totally stands out. And we just really wanted to make sure that the compost bins would be easily identified by employees. Also, when placing the bins, we made sure that they were in the same order in the break areas. In the earlier photo, we had the recycle green on the left and the compost yellow on the right. So we made sure that was standardized throughout. We also did a full signage refresh of the trash and the recycling signage. to make sure things were consistent and standardized to reflect the items accepted in each stream. So by placing the compost, there was things that were on the trash sign that should no longer go in the trash, so we had to move. Part of the standardization and consistency effort was also bin liners. The compost vendor here requires compostable bags, which are translucent green in color. And then we had all the recycle bins clear lined and all the trash black lined. This helps with collection and disposal processes, which we'll get into on the next slide. And next slide, please, Alec. So collection, I know this is like a big sticking point with a lot of sites and can be challenging. It is a crucial step in making sure that a program is successful. Anytime you add bins, it can add collection time for the janitorial staff and potential changes in the collection procedure. Make sure to communicate in advance with the right people before launching the program. So many times we've had complaints that the cleaners are not composting properly, and it usually stems from no one talking to the supervisor or manager about the program in advance. So just determine who needs to be involved in the discussion. If you're a tenant in a larger building, for example, it may involve the property management company or whoever contracts with the cleaning company to make those decisions. Sometimes you may even need to engage with the union representative depending on the nature of the custodial staff. So in our example, SBM was already the janitorial service provider. So we were able to easily have these conversations and determine how much additional time it would take for the cleaners to collect the compost bins and to see if it was something we could do within the existing scope of work. Also because the different liner colors were in place, and the fact that the totes that are used to store the bagged compost prior to haul collection were in the same place as the trash and recycling compactors, we didn't need to modify any existing collection routes or collection processes. We could just kind of do the same thing we were already doing. The logistics is super important to work out, even though it can seem like a hassle at the time. For example, we've seen at other sites where maybe the new service that's been provided by the, if you have an offsite collection, the compost carts or dumpsters are nowhere near existing trash and recycling dumpsters. So that involves a significant shift in routes and timing for the collection staff. Plus, if you're dealing with totes, it can involve moving those heavy totes up and down an incline possibly, which can pose safety concerns for the staff. Another important aspect about collection staff training is how you want to deal with and manage contamination of compost. So generally, the role of collection staff is to collect the contents of the bin. In our example, pull and tie off the green bag and put it in the collection cart, transport it to the place, transport it and place it in the hauler provided containers. So in this case, contamination would be anything that is not in a green bag, like a clear or black bag, placed into the hauler provided compost containers. So this is, in this case, a training issue, easily resolved. It starts getting a little grayer when you ask the collection staff to also manage and control contamination within the bags. So for example, like the contamination by your site employees or occupants not putting the right thing in the right bin. So keep in mind, when you ask the collection staff to make a judgment call, you have to be very specific as to what you are asking them to do. So if your instruction is to discard any green bag that has contamination, what does that mean? Be specific and clarify exactly what you need them to do. So is contamination any trash? How much trash? Over 10%? What does 10% look like? So thinking about all those specifics can really help further clarify so that that instruction is being completed as you want it to. And then if the instruction is to discard a contaminated bag as trash, think about what that process is and what that looks like. Do you need to then put that green bag in a black bag because now it's trash? I've seen many instances of complaints where cleaners are instructed to discard the bags that are contaminated in the trash, but then we get complaints that there's green bags going in the trash stream, yet that is exactly what they were asked to do. So engaging with the collection staff on how to identify contamination can help, but it needs to be clear, specific, and consistent. If you want the collection staff to physically remove any visible contamination, keep in mind that this will also take more time and involve additional safety precautions. Everybody wants your compost program to be successful, but we also want everyone to be safe. So treat them as a partner in your program and not an adversary. Next slide. And then the best way to reduce contamination in the bag is to educate often with more than just posted signs and email announcements. And I'm sure everybody here knows that you can have the best signage and not everybody's going to do the right thing 100% of the time. I think that's a challenge that we all face. Maybe a topic for another day. We'll find ways to engage with site occupants in fun and positive ways. The green team for our customer holds an event every quarter to improve awareness in the recycle and compost program. It's helpful to target your messages. So for example, we're still finding way too many fiber food containers in the office trash. So our next engagement will be solely focused on the composting of the fiber food containers. It's helpful to do waste audits, even if it's just a sample, to tell people how they're doing. Another issue that we're actually running into because the program is so successful at the initial site that it was piloted at is that we're running out of space for the hauler provided totes. So we're working to see if there's alternate collection scenarios or different storage equipment options. And next slide. So this is my final slide. I know I kind of rushed through a lot of that quickly, but I want to make sure we get to the discussion. So this is some results from a waste audit we did just in February of this year. So they went from 1 site to 8 sites. So we just did an audit of all the 8 sites. And they just expanded the compost program in October of 2022, learning from some of the best practices at the initial site that it was rolled out at. For this, we just sorted the landfill waste. The client was only interested in knowing what, how much contamination or compost potential was in the trash. And so of everything, 44% by weight was compostable. And of that 44%, which is in the pie chart there, about half of that is still from office and break room areas. So there's a bit of potential still to go. By weight, food waste and paper towels is still the biggest opportunity, but by volume, the fiber food packaging has made up a lot of that. And that's why we're going to focus on some of that for our next messaging. Overall, we did do a similar audit last year in 2022, and that found because of the 2022 audit, they expanded it. So there's been a significant decrease in paper towels. So you see that's kind of in the, what does that look like? 200-pound range. It was double that last year. So that's all that I have there. So Alec, go to the next slide and then turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Amy. So as I mentioned at the top of the hour, we want to do just a brief presentation, not go too in depth, but really with this, we were asking Amy to sort of whet our appetites, to get us thinking about some of the different issues to help get the juices flowing as we go into the discussion. So this was very helpful. I think you covered a lot of the basic areas. Couple of things. If you have questions, we'll take 1 or 2 questions right now, but for the most part, we're actually going to save questions for those who want to do more of a deep dive and hear more about Amy's example and ask questions of her. We're going to have you stay in this main room after we split into groups in just a moment. But before we do that, we do have a couple live poll questions that we wanted to ask folks. So Marissa, if we can pull these up, and folks, if you can go ahead and just respond to these. And these assume that you are directly working with an organics collection program or with the facility. And if it doesn't apply to you, then certainly just ignore this. But go ahead and provide your responses. What is the status of any food waste collections from specifically where we're talking about non-dining indoor locations? Do you have a program in place? Is it something that's on your radar? You're in a pilot stage? So we'll wait a few seconds, 30 seconds or so for folks to fill this out. Amy, while we're just sitting here, so with the audits that you did for this project, you were not looking at contamination rates, but I'm curious, just from your experience working with other office in similar locations, is, as you mentioned, contamination is inevitable on some level, but have you found that there's sort of a typical range that from your perspective might be considered good, an acceptable range that's a realistic target folks can aim for?
Yeah, I think it depends, right, on what your goals are and kind of what's accepted or acceptable for that threshold. I think there are places that have maybe a greater higher success rate. I think what I've seen a shift in is that the compost and recycle programs are improving in contamination reduction. So we're seeing more just recyclables and recycle bins and more just compost and compost bins. So I think it's just maybe showing that people are aware of what should go there, but then I think it's still some of those items that they're like, oh, do I put this here? Do I put this there? Or whatever those other reasons are, where there's still some more potential things being discarded in that trash or landfill bin.
Yeah, got it. Obviously, a lot more we can deep dive on contamination, and we'll have the opportunity for those who want to focus on this with the discussion groups. But just to end off this poll, looks like I actually find this encouraging. I think certainly if we'd asked this question maybe 5 years ago, we'd see something different. But it looks like, for the most part, we've got at least 50% are saying that in some form they have a program in actually running on the ground, and only about 26% saying that they don't have a program or have near-term plans for that. So I think that's certainly an indicator right there of how this trend has moved even in the last 5 years. So that's fantastic. Then we do have one additional question, follows this one that I'll pull up. So same thing, if this applies to you, go ahead and fill this out. But what's the number one challenge that, for those of you who do have an active program, what's the number one challenge for collecting organics, food scraps, again, from these indoor setting aspects? So as folks fill that out, another question I'll throw out to you, Amy. You've worked obviously a lot with custodial, with labor. You touched a little bit on sort of training upfront, things to include with that. One thing from my experience, oftentimes with custodial, you can have high turnover, or especially if you're working with like a management company, that creates a sort of degree of separation between yourself and the folks on the ground. I'm curious if there's any recommendations on not just implementing the program or doing initial training, but sort of monitoring and keeping the health of that back of house collection system running smoothly over time so that you don't see an atrophy effect.
Yeah, I think like even with your front of house and your employee or occupant education, you want to have that same kind of frequency and check in on the back end of things. Like you said, there may be turnover. You may not have as much control. So as much as possible to set up those systems so that when there's new cleaners or custodial staff that come on board, what does that training look like, right? Somebody's training them to do the other components of their job. Make sure that the collection process is part of that. And just ongoing monitoring and training as part of that, those systems and checks in place.
Got it. Okay. Great. So let's go ahead and share the results for this question. And nothing too shocking, surprising here, but good percentage, 43% are citing contamination as or low participation as the main issue that stands out above all others. And I think that certainly reflects experience that many of us have had, how we address that. So let's go ahead and if we close out the polls now, we're now going to transition over to the breakout groups and to sort of get us all situated and understanding what we're going to do next. Let me welcome Julie Meir from Stanford University, as well as a member of the Zero Waste Campus Council, to tell us what we're going to do next.
Hey, Alec.
Yeah, Lynn?
Sorry, can I share one quick thing?
Sure.
I just wanted to refer the first poll, or just maybe a word of encouragement for those who are starting or who have not started a compost program, is that, we see in the news all the time, plastics recycling is down 5%. There's really no markets. And recycling, we put a lot of energy into. But if we think about it as ultimate collections of climate change, organics, and landfills, that if we don't have composting, and this is one of the things that is really kind of a big push, is there's a lot of food waste and there's a lot of compost that right now is going into the landfill that contributes directly to climate issues. So just kind of keep that in mind when we have, fast 30 years pushed so much on recycling and plastics and cans and things that, typical. This is really kind of the next step for us to really take a hold of and be important to divert the organics.
Excellent point. Yep. Great. Julie, let me hand it over to you.
Thank you, Alec. This has been great. And Amy, thank you so much for presenting and sharing your experiences in setting up and running an interior compost or collection from offices and restrooms. I found it interesting that you had already done the front of house, like kind of a little bit of the easier. And that's a note to everyone, like start off where the easy stuff is, like in your restrooms, collecting paper towels. You don't have as many people to deal with and even educate, because you can make that switch pretty quickly. So I'm sure some people have some questions for you, more detailed questions. So we are going to do this, our Zero Waste Campus Council Meetup Waste Down style, where we're going to go into breakout rooms and have just a discussion amongst ourselves about the different types of issues. And we've identified several issues here where we can break out. So the main room will be, if you don't press any buttons, just stay right here. You're going to be in the room with Amy, and any other topic that's up that we don't have a specific spot for. If you have a question or a comment or something, feel free to stay in this room. And we have some topics here that you can take a look at in terms of other topics might be working with non-labor stakeholders, compostable packaging, startup planning, paper towels, etc. Now, if you go to breakout room number 1, Alec, I think you need to move the slide for me.
Yep. And just one other thing I'll point out is as we break out in different rooms, if you have a tech issue, you're not sure how to move, if it's not straightforward, you can stay in here and my colleague Marissa will be able to help folks too for the first 30 seconds or so.
Right. And then in room number 1, you can join me if you want to talk about labor or custodial service. The potential discussion topics could include collection routines, managing the workload, integrating with other waste collections, labor or union relations, contracted service providers, and or training procedures. And one thing to know is that in our meetup Waste Down, we're all experts in our space of our campus, but we're really here to kind of gather ideas from each other. We may not have all of the answers, but certainly we come together to see if we can find solutions to unique situations. In room number 2 is going to be other operational issues and infrastructure. And Lynn King, who is also on the Zero Waste Campus Council and at UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, will be there to discuss potentially collection equipment, bags, bin design, looking at operationally related features, managing odors, bugs, cleaning the bins, and working with your haulers or collections to an offsite facility. In room number 3, we're going to talk about education and behavior. And Gina from University of Southern California, who is also on the Zero Waste Campus Council Executive Committee, is going to talk about addressing how everyone addresses contamination, labels and signage, best practices in terms of bin design, placement, service to guide behavior, communication platforms, and outreach strategies. So right now is the time to take a look at the bottom bar where you'll see a breakout room icon. you can click on that and go into a breakout room. And you're also welcome to, go in, and if the conversation is good, great. If you have another idea, you're welcome to jump into other breakout rooms. It's a very fluid, just a way for you to get some information you need to make your program better. So let's go ahead and do that now.
Good. And I'll just point out that we'll be here for roughly the next 45 minutes. We'll call everyone back into the common room at the end at about 10 minutes after the hour. But as Julie said, we will be in it for a while. So if you find that you're getting what you need from one room, feel free to jump to another.
Yeah, and then the last thing I'll mention is we are taking notes. So again, another meetup waist down style is if you clicked on the presentation in Google Docs, the slides of 23 through roughly 29, 30 or so will have notes that you're welcome to participate in, but we'll be taking those notes so that they'll be captured. And then lastly, at the very end, Alec, you had a resource page that you wanted people to potentially populate, sharing resources.
Correct. Yeah, we set up these slides 33 and 34. If they're examples of case studies, reports, contracts, things that are relevant documents that are on this topic you want to share with others, this is where you can just drop them in, and we'll sort of crowdsource a set of resources that folks can access on their own during or after the program. And so look for those on slides 33 and 34. And again, if you missed it, look in the chat to find the link to get access to this Google Deck directly, and you're able to make edits directly onto it on your own.
Great. All right, everyone, go ahead and pick your breakout room, and we'll see you over there, or you'll stay here. Looks like people have already joined.
Great. And Julie Lynn. Oh, yeah. Good. I'm going to bounce around, but Amy, I'll hand over this room to yourself. Oh, and just a reminder for those who are sticking in this main room, we are recording the program, and that will include this discussion. So just fair notice that this conversation is being recorded. If you're not comfortable being included with that, you may just want to only put things into the chat or leave your camera off, but I'll hand it over to you, Amy.
Great. Well, I guess first of all, does anybody have any technical issues that we need to support of those that are still in the main room? Okay, well, if you do, let us know. We'll just open it up to questions for folks that are still in the main room. You can come off mute, hop in. Curious to know if, yeah, hi, Nicole.
Hi, Amy. I'm at the University of Michigan, and our compost site that we have our own hauler, and what we work with a off-campus compost site. They're changing their compostable guidelines, right? They're, like you said, they mentioned they're moving away from PLA. Yeah. And they mentioned fiber containers. But I'm wondering if you have any insights. Like, I know in the past, I'm not sure if it's a big of an issue anymore, like the PFAS issue in fiber pressed materials, if you've encountered any of that, or like sneaky plastic linings on fiber products. Do you encounter that? And then whether or not you also require compostable certification for those fiber products.
Yeah, so like anything that may or may not be accepted, I always defer to the processing facility that's taking it directly. Sometimes, they will say specifically like, no liners, they'll be very specific, or they'll say, okay, send it to us and we'll test it and see how it breaks down in our system. Yeah, so I think it does depend a lot on that. I think it is hard to find. So a lot of the things that are BPI certified, compostable, are still not being necessarily accepted. And so that's, I think, a challenge right now with some of the, even though it's certified, it may still not be accepted. So I always defer to the facility itself. And then I've been looking for fiber-based food service products that don't have the liner. And then before making a big switch, especially if you're using a lot of them, you might want to pilot it first and see how it works to make sure it's not gonna, it's gonna be good for whoever's using it, during the time you need have that. So I don't know if anybody else that's on has any more feedback for Nicole on that. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's, I think everybody, there's a lot of people that are having that same challenge.
Yeah, thank you. Because we're like, we have some control on campus, but then a lot of the local restaurants use them and they don't always look different, whether or not they have the certification.
Yeah.
So trying to wrap our head around getting new educational stuff out.
Well, and depending too on your
procurement.
area, like if you are able to have the conversations with the local businesses that are, the students are going to, and they're bringing the takeout containers back, are there different partnerships, or like, can you have that conversation? They may not be able to switch, but you're opening that dialogue. So maybe they can look into it and see if it would work for their business to do that.
Thank you.
Who else has a question or comment or experience to share? Thank you, Nicole. Courtney.
Hi there, Amy. Thanks. So I'm kind of just struggling with, so I'm new to my role at this location, but not new to the world of trash. But I guess what's different here for me that I'm thinking it through is just the whole, our food waste goes to anaerobic digestion, right? So the whole depackaging of stuff and right. And then there's people locally who also use a farm-based composter. So it's just that messaging that you don't want to, we don't want to spend the money on the compostable products if they're getting sorted out, but you don't want to not have it, because then people who aren't familiar with AD think it's like at my place down the street, because it's literally like there's literally a local hauler that does farm-based, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like ours just goes somewhere different. But so I just don't know that whole messaging. And then it's like, how much, what I mean? Just kind of going through that piece and then just kind of thinking it through. Obviously, some of the fiber is going to get in there anyways, because it might get soft and soaked up and it's going through. But like, it's the PLA, right? Like, and then how much do we spend then on we have some good pilot programs with reusables in the dining hall, which is obviously the way to go. But it's the takeaways, it's the campus center, it's the, that kind of stuff. So I think I'm just kind of thinking through best practices and what people are dealing with, because it is, I mean, what kills me too is like these anaerobic digesters are taking bones, right? Like they're taking bones and things, and then all of a sudden somehow the PLA fork is not. I'm just like, I feel like when it's, in those augers, when it's getting kind of ground up, I feel like some of it is going through, but then it is, I don't know. Anyways, like, I feel like how much is a PLA spoon chopped up different from a bone fragment that came from a fried chicken piece too?
Yeah. And I think from that perspective, right, when they say they don't want it, it's just like, it's more work for them.
Well,
to
they'll
like
take it, but it's not getting.
Right, exactly, right.
And then we're
accepted in their system.
It's a fancy trash way. It's taking a special journey to the trash can, right? Like it's going, and so, yeah.
Yeah, and so that, it's kind of had a lot of conversations like this conversation very frequently. It is hard with the mixed messaging. And, just like sometimes emphasizing this is what we do here on this site and this kind of where it goes. Not so, depending on how far you want to go down that downstream, the whys, but it is hard from that perception standpoint. If you were buying compostables and then you're switching back over to maybe other types of disposables, the perception that you're not necessarily doing the right thing anymore from maybe that other kind of supply chain marketplace. Like if you are still purchasing the compostables, you're still signaling, right, that there's this market.
Right, and then obviously there's a benefit just even in general, right? Like obviously it's probably better in general, even if you don't even have a compost system, sometimes to have non-oil based or petroleum based, products anyways, right? There's less plastic in general, right? Like there's at least the benefits of that. So I think it's just all of those, the costs, the where's it going, it's not required, that kind of a thing. It's all those I think it's just something that this is what it is, and I think that's where I'm like, dealing with as kind of that new part of my, So.
No, it's really hard, and it's a hard message because you're saying, no, we have these compostable things and you can't compost it. It's like, well, why? And, because I think really people want to do the right thing, right? That's when we talk about wish cycling and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And just due to those downstream systems, you can't. So I don't know that I have an answer for you, but I think that there's a lot of people dealing with this exact issue. And it does come down to what's going to make the most sense for, you know, the site, the budget, operations. And
I think that's what it is, just having those discussions. Yeah, thank you. I think, and I mean, the good thing I think for at least on our piece is like, we can collect it in there. It's not a contaminant. So that's it. But I just don't want the people to be like, gotcha, you know, like
right, because
we
it's,
found out that it's actually going, it's like, well, we're never pretending that it was, right? Because just like right now, like people are trying to catch us in, you know, recycling that plastic. So say, well, let's talk about bottles and cans and not everything that's made out of plastic. But I think I don't want someone to come back with that whole, hey, I found out that it's actually not even being composted. It's like, well, that's true, but it might be. There's a chance that it still could get through because of how it's being processed. But anyways, I think it's just things to think through and how we decide to move forward. But appreciate your input.
Yeah, and I don't know that I have answers. I think both Nicole's
yeah.
question, your question are things that, we're having these conversations all the time.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily have the answers, but you know, they are real issues, right?
The real issues. Yeah. I think just the validity that like, yes, that exists, right? So I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on either of these, or who else has a question? Does anybody want to come off mute and anybody? Does anybody have any maybe successes that you've experienced that you want to share?
Grabbing back. Let me sure I've got my screen share going again. I hope everybody had a good conversations. Seems like we never have quite enough time, but we're doing good. So I want to thank everybody who took notes in particular too. And so just as a reminder, if you missed it or if you want to be able to come back at any point after today, just note here how we have all these notes from the discussion. We do have a recording from Amy's presentation and from the main room, but we won't, and that will be posted in the next day or two, and we'll send out an email for folks to access that link. But we don't have recordings from the breakout rooms themselves. So these notes will be a great resource to come back to. And as I mentioned, this will be here in perpetuity afterwards. So you can always come back as long as you hold on to this link. And we'll also link that from the same page that has the recording. So we just have a couple closing things coming up. First, let me invite Nikhil to come up and just give us a little bit more background about the Zero Waste Campus Council.
Thank you, Alec. So the Zero Waste Campus Council, we're a technical council of the California Resource Recovery Association. And so we're dedicated to kind of driving institutional and corporate campuses nationwide towards zero waste by connecting them and letting them share resources and expertise. So we kind of try to support this network of campuses that we've brought together who are all in kind of different phases of their own zero waste journeys. But the goal is to connect them and then help one another identify and scale best practices, relating to waste minimization and management. And one of the ways that we do this, the main way, is through the Meetup Waste Down. So that's a monthly networking event where we'll do breakout rooms on various kind of whatever the topics are related to that time of year. So we've done like move out or graduation and commencement for universities, things like that. So we try and select topics that are going to be really relevant and not just related to higher education, but medical campuses, research campuses, things like that as well. And so that's, as you can see on the slide, that's the last Tuesday of the month. And you can email Zero Waste Campus Council at crra.com to get on the list for those invitations. You can also join our Slack channel, which is linked in Marissa just linked it in the chat, and then it's also within the slide deck. And then lastly, we'll just plug the CRRA annual conference, which is happening this August in Burlingame, California.
Great. And the Zero Waste Campus Council, you guys typically do some sort of program there, or certainly a lot of folks are from the council are in California and so are active at that conference.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks, Nikhil. So so this program today is the third of the 3 programs that we've been doing as a joint partnership between Busch Systems and Zero Waste Campus Council, using this format. I do want to point out, focusing just on the Busch Systems, on the program series that we do on our own during the months when we were not working with the council. We do have our own program coming up next month in May. We haven't locked down the exact dates and still confirming some of the speakers, but it's going to be focusing on data. How do we use analytics to optimize and improve our programs? So we'll be looking at a range of different types of how to track data and how to analyze it, how to use that to do things like figure out where the optimal placement is for bins. How many bins do you need for a certain location? So how to read that kind of data to make those types of decisions. So anybody who registered for today's program, you'll eventually get an email telling you the exact date and speakers and all for that. That'll be more of a traditional talking head where we'll have longer presentations from multiple speakers for that program. And also just want to point out that we've got an archive of programs for the Busch Systems, our series of webinars that we do that are more presentation formats, as well as recordings from the 2 other programs we did with Zero Waste Campus Council on special events and on bin design. You can find the recordings for those, as well as some of these other topics on the Busch Systems website. If you go just our basic website and do a /webinars, that will get you to that. And there are a lot of resources that we've got posted to go with those as well, including a topic we did last year on food organics collections. We've got a number of case studies, best practices, documents that folks can find archived with that recording. So that brings us to the end of today's program. I want to again thank Amy Martman for presenting and sharing your case study. I want to thank everybody who helped facilitate the conversations and took notes. And most of all, I want to thank everybody who joined us today. Good luck with your programs. Would love to hear successes going forward. Always love to hear those, and where there's an opportunity to share those, encourage you to reach out. Everyone have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.
Great, thanks, Alec.